Remember when I said it was Year of the Dwarf? Well, get ready, my Hashut worshipping big hat lovers, because today is the day I paint the biggest and most badass Chaos Dwarf ever made. Welcome back to Emblem of Doom Miniatures. My name is Deets, and praise Hashut, because today is finally the day I'm going to paint this Chaos Dwarf Sorcerer on Lammasu. Now, as you all know, I've been on the hunt for Chaos Dwarf minis recently, and I've been a very lucky boy because I've managed to find a few here and there. After painting the Great Taurus, I was thinking to myself, what do I want to paint next? And obviously I wanted to go big, so I decided to hunt down this Chaos Dwarf Sorcerer on Lammasu. And the best part about it was I didn't have to pay $600. I managed to find it for a pretty reasonable price on eBay, so that's always a bonus. Now, I have a few more Chaos Dwarf models that I'll be painting over the course of the next year, so if you're into that sort of thing, make sure you hit the subscribe button. But anyway, my dudes, let's get straight into it. Now, all classic Warhammer models have a few things in common, and that is they all need pinning, green stuffing, they're heavy, they're hard to work with, they're basically just a nightmare to build. This guy came in 5 or 6 parts, and I am missing the banner poles, unfortunately, but I'll locate those later on down the track and I'll put them on later. Now, I'm going to try build this thing as best as I can so it doesn't break apart. I'm going to use some epoxy adhesive because super glue won't cut the mustard. You can pick this 2-part epoxy adhesive up from any hardware store, and it's pretty easy to use. Just make sure you're in a well ventilated area, crank up the fan, and maybe wear a mask. The Lammasu came together pretty well, but the only downside to the adhesive is that it does take a while to dry and stick together compared to super glue. It did require me to hold each part in place for about 5 minutes, but I discovered a little trick as I was gluing it together. What I did was epoxy glue the parts together, then hold them together for a few minutes just until they got a little bit tacky, and then I used some super glue in the cracks to kind of hold each piece in place. Now for the part that I've been dreading, and that is the green stuffing and filling of the gaps, but I had to suck it up because you guys need more videos. I rolled the green stuff into extremely thin, long sausages and just pressed them down into the gaps with my fingers. Okay, time for a hot tip, and you guys probably already know this, but if you want to make life easier with green stuffing, definitely use Vaseline. I used it and it made life so much easier for myself. It really does help, as green stuff can really stick to your sausage fingers and make a fair bit of a mess. And like always, I whipped out my favorite hobby tool, the toothpick, and started sculpting some hair into the green stuff. I also covered this little wooden champion with some Vaseline as well. I went all around the green stuff and made sure it was smooth in the areas it needed to be and textured in other spots like around the wings. Time to slap on the base. Now this guy is really heavy, so I'm going to do my best to pin him down so we don't have a disaster later on down the track. I use a spot of paint on the hoofs to mark the Lammasu's foot position, and then using my hobby knife, I make an initial pilot hole. Then I bust out my drill and I go to town making sure this hole is big enough for the little hoof knob. I drill a small hole in the other hoof, being super careful not to go too deep, and then I glue some wire into the hoof with some epoxy, making sure it's nice and firm in the hole. I also drill a little hole in the base for this wire and slide the model onto the base. I loop some wire around the nub, bend over the other hoof's wire, and apply some more epoxy adhesive using my trusty old toothpick. Now, as I was cleaning the mold lines off, I stupidly trimmed off the little chain link that was connecting one of the skulls to his little bangle on his horn. So what I did was I just got a bit of wire, looped it around, and just super glued it on. And this will do. It looks pretty good. It looks like it's meant to be there, so it's fine. Next up, I drilled a hole in the Dwarf's bum and put some wire through a little cork saddle I made and glued him down. This cork saddle will fit my painting handle nicely. I then glued down some fine sand to the base and then hit them both with some black primer. Now this nightmare setup and build took me around 6 to 8 hours. I'm not too sure. I had a few breaks in there as well. But yeah, I was itching to get some paint on these guys. But first up, we're going to paint the Lammasu because I like to get the big things out of the way. Now with this guy, I'm going to stick to the original boxer as best as I can. He is black, but I'm going to try and make him look a bit more cold and gargoyle-like and a little bit more illustrated, if that makes any sense. I go back over the black prime with some Abaddon black, as I did miss a few spots here and there in some hard to reach places. Now, if you guys watch the channel recently, you probably know my recipe for black pretty well by now, but today I'm going to throw in a little bit of Stegodon scale green with the Dark Reaper to get more of a bluish finish. This probably didn't do too much, but I just wanted to have an experiment to see how it looked. I apply this all over the raised areas on the wings, face, and the muscles. I then go over with some Thunderhawk blue to the same areas, but cover just a little less. Now this model is a little difficult to paint because it has a lot of flat spaces with not much detail, so I tried to give it something more to look at, and I pasted on this ribcage look to each of the sides. I then carefully place a thicker highlight of rust grey around each of the muscles and start to give the face some shape by glazing this on points of interest like the cheeks, nose, and the forehead. To finish up, I mix 1 part rust grey to 1 part blue horror for a final highlight and place this on the top parts of the muscles, and then using a fine brush, I tackle the face again. I use this to bring out some of his angry expression by painting little lines and wrinkles. Now painting this colour on this size of a model was a bit of a learning curve for me. I am happy with how it turned out, but I probably would change a few things if I had my time again. Now the box art has this guy with a vibrant orangey red beard and fur and reddish wings, so I applied a mix of corn red and evil sun scarlet over these areas. I will make the beard, fur and the wings slightly different so they don't look overly the same. I apply some fleshed hair as red over these parts to deepen the colour just a little bit. I'll tackle the hair and fur first, and I apply some lines of evil suns over the strands of hair, and I'm not too fussed if bits of this get in the recesses. I then use some Troll Slayer orange and go back over these areas with a skinny brush, being a little bit more careful this time round. And to finish, I use a mix of Troll Slayer orange and Uriel yellow for that final highlight. This makes the hair really fiery, and I think I've maybe discovered a new technique for painting up some dwarf slayers. At this point I thought it was a good time to tackle the face because I was a little bit bored and over painting large flat areas, and I always like bringing these models to life, and I feel like when you paint their faces it's the best way to do that. I hit each eye super carefully with some Uriel yellow and then place a small line of Abaddon black in the center. I want to give that bottom swollen lip a bit of oomph, so I decided to make it purple. Maybe he got stung by a bee or something, I don't know. I apply some Gene Stealer purple all over that lip, and then I hit the gums with some Emperor's Children. I go back over the lip with a wash of Magos purple, and then use a wash of Doomfire magenta on the gums. A coat of Gene Stealer purple goes back over the bottom lip, and then I mix in some Pallid Witch Flesh to this, and mark out some small little lines. This gives the lip a cracked-like appearance. For the gums, I go back over with some Emperor's Children and then mix in some Pallid Witch Flesh to build up that highlight. Now if you guys have watched a few of my previous videos, you've definitely seen my technique for painting horns and bone, so I'll keep this really quick. I apply Carrick Stone all over the teeth and the horns. Then I use a mix of 3/4 skeleton horde to 1/4 contrast medium all over. I then go back over with more Carrick Stone, being careful not to cover up the darker parts at the base of the horns and the teeth. Then, using a mix of black and Stonewall Grey, I cover the tops of the horns and just glaze that upwards. I glaze Carrick Stone back in the opposite direction towards the bottom, and then it's time for some skinny little highlights of Carrick Stone and Bone White on the bone parts. And then I use some Stonewall Grey and add some skinny lines to the top darker parts of the horns. You can add some wear and tear and little nicks to the horns by using pure black and then just using an underline of white. We are on the home straight with this Lammasu now, and I go over all the jewellery with a few coats of Gehenna's gold and then hit it with a wash of Guilliman flesh, making sure it pulls in all the recesses. When I'm happy with that, I highlight with a bit more Gehenna's gold and some polished gold. Back onto the wings, and I use a colour combo of Evil Suns, then some Wild Rider red, and then to finish up, 2 thin coats orange flare for that final highlight. I just use a skinny brush and build some of these lines up, making sure the lighter colours cover less of the area. Anyway, that's one Chaos Dwarf Lammasu finished, and now it's time for the fun part. It's time to paint that Dwarf Sorcerer. But before we get into that, and if you're wanting to support the channel, the best way to do that is by joining our Patreon. We have a great little community on our Discord, and I'll be uploading the odd video here and there on the Patreon channel. So if you want to support the channel, hit up the link in the bio and join our Patreon today. But enough of that, let's go paint this Dwarf Sorcerer. Just like the Lammasu, I hit the Dwarf with some thinned down Abaddon black, and after that's dry, it's time to paint the face. I apply a base coat of Cadian flesh all over the face and the hands. Then I use a wash of watered down Guilliman flesh all over. I like my dwarfs to have a bit of a pale colour to their skin because I feel like they're the opposite to normal dwarfs who have red rosy cheeks and high blood pressure faces. I go back over the raised areas with pure Kislev flesh, and then I mix in small amounts of Pallid Witch flesh to the Kislev flesh and highlight smaller areas until I'm happy. Next to the eyes, and I really didn't do a good job with these. They're always tricky to get right, and you'll notice later on in the video they kind of look a little bit better. It's because I couldn't stand looking at him because it was just an absolute mess. Surprisingly enough, classic dwarfs do have a bit of blue thrown into their colour schemes from time to time, so I wasn't not going to add this in just to get a bit more vibrancy to the guy. I hit the huge hat with some Techless blue, and then go over with a wash of watered down ultramarine blue. I then glaze Techless blue towards the top of the hat and add small amounts of Lothern blue to the mix and just glaze that upwards to emulate some light coming from the top. Now on the box art, this guy has plenty of black going on, and I wanted to keep the black different to his black hair colour but similar to the Lammasu, so I used the same Dark Reaper, Thunderhawk blue and Rust Grey combo on his horns, cloak and the little ball on top of his hat. This Dwarf Sorcerer's jacket is covered in these cool little lightning bolts, so I used some bronze flesh tone as a base for all of these. They're pretty tricky to make out, and it took me longer than expected to paint them all. I used a wash of Seraphim Sepia covering all the bronze flesh tone. Then I used a mix of bronze flesh tone and Uriel yellow to highlight each of the little raised parts. Once I'm happy with that, I use pure Uriel yellow back over to a smaller area. And then I use a final highlight of Uriel yellow and Dawn yellow and just edge highlight bits and pieces and parts where they need it. It wouldn't be a Dwarf without some red, so I hit parts of the staff, hat, and the axe handle with some Evil Sun Scarlet. And I'm going to do some freehanding later on, so I put down Ulthuan Grey on the jacket cuffs in preparation for this. Back onto the reds, and I use a good wash of Flesh Tearers Red all over the Evil Sun Scarlet, making sure it pulls around the edges or in the recesses. Then it's time for another coat of Evil Suns, a small highlight of Wild Rider Red to the top facing areas or the edges. And then using a skinny brush, I use a tiny edge highlight of Orange Flare to finish off. I love a classic vibrant red, and I can always rely on this combo to pull through for me. Time for the true metallic metals, and I use gunmetal to the axe and the point on the staff. And then I use Gehenna's Gold to the staff, little bits on the hat, the arrow on the axe, and his beard jewelry. Next up are the leathers, and I use Doombull Brown all over the boots and his little fanny pack. Then I hit that with a wash of Agrax Earthshade. And I mix up some Doombull Brown and Scrag Brown to highlight. Super simple stuff, and this brown leather looks pretty good to me. It's time to paint those bone colours, and I'm not going to go back over this because you probably heard me say this a million times, but I basically used the same techniques that I used with the Lammasu. We are nearly finished, and I always save some freehanding for last, and this guy has some funky little triangles on his sleeve, so I go back over the Ulthuan Grey with a highlight of Ulthuan Grey and a mix of white to the top facing areas. Then it's time for the tricky part, and I recommend not drinking coffee before attempting freehands because you might get the jitters like me. I use some Evil Suns, and I carefully place sharp little lines around the cuffs and colour them in after. I also highlight them with a bit of Wild Rider Red and Orange Flare so they don't look so flat. If you do make a mistake, just go back over it with the Ulthuan Grey and try again. Okay, so we're really close now. It's time for the best part, and that is to paint the beard. To make this black look different than the rest, I use a mix of Abaddon Black and Stonewall Grey, and I slowly build this highlight up until I'm happy by adding in more and more Stonewall Grey. I won't let the highlight get to a pure Stonewall Grey as it might look a bit jarring. And after this, I cleaned up a few bits and pieces here and there and painted the base Goblin Green. But anyway, here it is. Here is a Chaos Dwarf Sorcerer on a Lammasu. Thanks so much for watching, my dudes, and a massive thank you to all my Patreon members. You're all a bunch of legends, and I really appreciate all the support you guys give me. Anyway, let me know down in the comments what you want to see me paint next, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.